Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Okay. Hello. So I don't usually do, astronomy or biology stuff. I think evolution's fascinating. Preemptive like, I've been wanting to do this video for about a week now, and I'm doing it right now. Useful charts, awesome channel. My name is Connor. Hello. If you are new, coming out of my afternoon tired, like after lunch, I have my coffee. All right. So let's do it. I love this stuff because I don't do this content, this kind of subjects like this. I'm going to have a lot to say, but I'm going to try and keep it a bit down just to not ruin the flow of the chart, because then I'm just going to be lost. So I'll try and keep it to a few shorter. Let's go.
Today I'm going to show you the step-by-step evolutionary journey from the earliest single-celled organisms all the way to modern humans. I'll be using my evolution and classification of life chart, which is available as a poster from my website usefulcharts.com. As the title suggests, this is both an evolution chart and a classification chart. So it not only shows how living things are connected from an evolutionary point of view, it also shows the categories that are used to classify living things. So
what are seahorses? Really, what is a seahorse? Is a seahorse a fish? Is it a mollusk or a crustacean or something? Like, what's a seahorse? I was thinking about that the other day, and it's like,
you'll be hearing familiar terms such as kingdom, phylum, class, and order. This video is part of a two-channel collaboration with fellow YouTuber Stefan Milo. Whereas I will be describing the full journey of human evolution, Stefan will be talking about some of the quirks in that process, which demonstrate that our bodies were not designed from scratch, but rather bear traces of a long history of adaptation.
So, like
make sure you check his video after this one.
Or the appendix. Let's go. All right, I'm excited. Original link, Discord stuff.
So we're going to start at the bottom of the chart with the emergence of life about 4 billion years ago. That life would have been in the form of single-celled organisms, similar to the bacteria of today. Now, I'm not going to discuss how that first cell came to exist, because that's something that is beyond the scope of evolutionary theory.
Is it fair to say I've heard before it's like when chemistry turned into biology? Does that sound right?
However, there are several ideas out there about how that happened. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you'll want to search for the term abiogenesis. I'm also not going to talk about viruses. You can see how I've placed them off to the side here, because there is currently some disagreement over how exactly they relate to life and whether they evolved before or after bacteria. But
So
what we do
creepy, they're
know
not
is that
alive.
life eventually proceeded in 3 different directions. These are called domains, and they are the top classification level, coming before the more well-known kingdom level. So we have bacteria, which includes single-celled organisms that often cause infections in humans, such as cholera or tetanus. Then we have archaea, which are kind of like bacteria and can sometimes be found in really extreme environments, such as super hot or super salty conditions. And then finally, and most important to us, is the eukaryote domain. Eukaryote means true cell, and is so labeled because eukaryotes have cells with a nucleus and other inner parts. This originally occurred because of a process known as endosymbiosis, in which several different types of cells came together to form one big cell that was more complex. This likely occurred about 2 billion years ago. From this point, life again proceeded in 3 different directions. First, there were different types of algae that eventually evolved into the plant kingdom. Second, there were various types of mold that evolved into the fungus kingdom. And then third, there were several amoeba-like organisms that evolved into the animal kingdom. All of these simple...
So, are we any closer related to fungus than we are to plants? Sort of weird. So like that tree out there is like my distant cousin, and I'm learning. All right, guys. Okay.
forms of life are called protists. And in fact, they can actually be divided into a bunch of mini kingdoms. The fungus kingdom, of course, includes the familiar mushroom, but also things like yeast and the mold that grows on bread. But this chart is mostly concerned with the two really big kingdoms, plants and animals.
Jesus, ADD. Okay, sorry. All right.
This chart is mostly concerned with the two really big kingdoms, plants and animals. And since we're mostly going to be looking at the animal side, let's quickly look at the plant side before we do so. So from red algae and brown algae eventually came green algae. Plants are green because they have a special part of their cell that other living things do not have. This is called a chloroplast, and it's the part that captures energy from the sun through a process called photosynthesis. From algae came the earliest types of land plants, such as moss. That occurred about 450 million years ago. From there, we get the simplest types of plants with branches and leaves, like ferns. Next, we get a really important development. We get plants that bear seeds and thus are able to replant themselves over longer distances.
Ferns don't have seeds.
It is at this point that the plant kingdom splits into two main divisions. We get conifers, which are trees with cones, such as pine trees or cypress trees.
Wait, did I miss something? How are ferns grown if they don't have seeds?
And then we get angiosperms, which are trees and plants with flowers. Now, interestingly, flowering plants actually evolved relatively late in Earth's history, only about 150 million years ago. That's halfway through the age of the dinosaurs. And when I say flowering plants,
that's crazy.
I'm not just talking about things like tulips, roses, and daisies. I'm also talking about the food that we eat. Everything from wheat and rice to fruits, vegetables, and even chocolate. All of those things come from flowering plants. Okay, what we really want to focus on, though, is the animal kingdom. Most people will be surprised to learn that a sea sponge is actually an animal. It might look like a plant, but it's actually comprised of a bunch of simple animal cells bunched together. From this point, what happened is that different cells evolved to perform different types of jobs, such as those involved in movement.
I know I'm pausing a lot. Coanoflagellates. So this is technically in the animal kingdom branch, but it's not an animal.
So for example, we eventually get jellyfish. A jellyfish is still a very simple creature, but unlike a sea sponge, it can move around. This is because it has nerve cells that send electrical signals to certain parts of its body, causing those body parts to jerk and thus causing itself to swim. Now keep in mind as we go step by step that each new development along the evolutionary journey took millions, if not tens of millions of years to occur. So none of these changes happened fast. 1,000,000 years is a really long time, and it's really hard for our brains to think using numbers that are that big. So just remember that evolution occurs because the mechanisms involved, such as mutation and natural selection, have really, really long periods to work with.
So it's like, so say like go back to Caesar, like 2,000 years ago. And then do that 50 times, because 2,000 times 5 is... No. 500 times. 200 times 5... Sorry, 2,000 times 5, Jesus, is 10,000. Add 2 zeros is 1,000,000. So 1,000,000 years is back to Caesar 500 times over again. Am I right there?
Okay, so around 550 million years ago, we get what's called the Cambrian explosion. That's when we get animal life starting to go in a bunch of different directions. And it all started with something called bilateria. If you look over at this flatworm here, you'll notice that one side of it mirrors the other side. Well, this is basically true for all animals from this point forward, including humans. That's why we have 2 eyes, 2 arms, 2 legs, and so forth. From here, animals can be divided into 2 categories, protostomes and deuterostomes. Protostomes include the various worm phyla, as well as the phyla Arthropoda and Mollusca. Phylum Arthropoda is comprised of all those creepy crawly things that most humans tend to hate, like...
I can deal with these. Crabs are fine. Even spiders, I'm conquering my fear of spiders more. But these house centipedes right here is just they creep me out so much. Like they're not big, but oh, they just ugh.
Spiders and insects, but also larger creatures like lobsters. Phylum Mollusca is comprised of creatures with hard shells like snails and clams, but also some really intelligent sea creatures such as octopi and squid. It is from early deuterostomes that the vertebrates eventually evolved. All vertebrates belong to the phylum Chordata, and they differ from invertebrates, shown in purple, in that they possess a backbone or spine, that long...
I have to go back 15 seconds, all right? Fast forward if you need to. I have to go back.
...and squid. It is from early, really intelligent sea creatures such as octopi and squid. It is from early deuterostomes that the vertebrates eventually evolved. All vertebrates belong to the phylum Chordata, and they differ from invertebrates, shown in purple, in that they possess a backbone or spine, that long column of bones that runs down the back and protects the spinal cord. The earliest vertebrates were all fish, first jawless fish, and then fish with jaws and teeth. After this point, we then get cartilaginous creatures like sharks, but also for the first time, creatures that have what we consider to be a full skeleton. The bony fish.
Seahorses.
Bony fish can be divided into two main categories.
So a seahorse is a fish, and Tiktaalik, I that's familiar. I've seen that on like Discovery Channel.
Skeleton. The bony fish.
Extinct.
Bony fish can be divided into two main categories. Most fish are ray-finned fish. These include all the familiar types of aquarium fish, such as tetras, guppies, and goldfish, and also all the fish that humans tend to eat, like cod, halibut, and salmon. The lobe-finned fish are quite a bit different. They have downward-facing fins with more muscles in them. Eventually, this feature led to the evolution of certain fish that could prop themselves up in shallow water, like the now extinct Tiktaalik. From a creature similar to Tiktaalik came the tetrapods. Tetra meaning four, and pod meaning feet. So tetrapods are animals with 4 limbs, which basically includes all of the animals that we tend to think of as being animals. First off, there's the amphibians, like frogs, who live both in the water and on land. But then something evolved called the amniotic sac, which allows some animals to lay their eggs on the land instead of in the water. From this point, animal life proceeded in 2 very different directions. We get the early synapsids that eventually evolved into mammals, and we get the sauropsids that eventually evolved into reptiles and birds. Since we'll be focusing mostly on mammals from this point forward, let's quickly look at the sauropsids before we do so. The 3 main reptile orders that still exist today are the crocodiles, the lizards, and the turtles. Most of the other orders are now extinct, such as the fish-like plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs.
So dinosaurs are considered, or were considered, reptiles. I thought that was a thing, like dinosaurs weren't reptiles. They were, like dinosaur was a whole different thing than a reptile, but according to this, apparently they technically were.
And the bird-like pterosaurs. Although those groups are sometimes called dinosaurs, the term dinosaur technically only refers to these 2 orders here, Saurischia and Ornithischia. Ornithischia, which means bird-hipped, includes dinosaurs like Triceratops and Stegosaurus, whereas Saurischia, which means lizard-hipped, includes the huge, long-necked herbivores called sauropods, as well as the carnivores called theropods.
Question, guys. How would they know? I'm sure they do. I'm not saying like, oh, it's fake, conspiracy. But how would they know from a skeleton what like the skin looked like and like their color? And I understand by the bone structure you can tell the sort of build of the muscle, but in terms of the aesthetic look, you know what I mean? Like how can you tell like the color of a skin from a skeleton?
In the theropod group, we get the infamous T-Rex as well as the raptors. The theropods are also important because it is from that group that birds eventually evolved, one of the earliest being the Archaeopteryx. Now, you might have thought that birds would have evolved from the bird-hipped dinosaurs, but take note that they actually evolved from the lizard-hipped dinosaurs, and in particular from the theropods. The technical term for birds is aves. So
why then call this the bird-hipped?
Bird class is called the avian class. Note that the ancestors of game birds like chickens and ducks evolved first, and then we get a large group known as the neo-aves, or new birds, where we find all sorts of familiar birds like eagles, pigeons, and crows. Okay, let's now go back to the synapsid line. The earliest synapsids looked a lot like reptiles, sort of like this pelycosaur here. But eventually their skeletal and organ structure evolved along a very different path. Initially, this had a lot to do with movement. If you watch a lizard move, you'll notice that they tend to waddle from side to side, whereas a dog has the ability to run in more of a galloping style. This is a very rough way to explain the initial difference. The first big group of synapsids were the therapsids, and from them evolved the cynodonts. Eventually, the cynodonts developed one of the key features of the mammal class. They became warm-blooded, which meant they also evolved hair or fur.
I also have another, warm-blooded, hair, fur. I got it. But whales, right? So whales are evolved from a land species, right? So whales actually took a journey, like a detour, so all life came from the ocean and then some went on land. And so whales went from the ocean, technically, I'm not saying, you know what I mean? Like they adapted to the land and then they adapted back to water. It's funny.
In order to regulate their temperature.
Am I right there?
Of course, the other thing that sets mammals apart is that they possess mammary glands, which they use to feed their young. In fact, this is where the word mammal comes from.
Okay.
One of the earliest types of mammals that still exists today.
I never put that together. Mammary, mammal.
Is the duck-billed platypus. They belong to mammals that still exists today is the duck-billed platypus. They belong to the monotreme order, and most people think they look awfully strange. But most mammals belong to a group called Theria, which simply means beasts. There are two major categories of beasts, marsupials and placentals, and the fact that they evolved differently had a lot to do with geography. For example, today we only find marsupials in the Americas and in Australia. Marsupials, such as the kangaroo or opossum, grow their babies in a pouch, whereas placentals have a placenta and are thus able to grow their babies inside and give birth to them when they are more well developed. I should note that up until the time that modern humans arrived in Australia, there were all sorts of other types of marsupials, types that we don't see today, including marsupials that looked like cats and marsupials that looked like bears. But let's continue with the placental line. Some of the oldest branches of this group eventually lead to elephants, as well as sloths and armadillos. But another branch leads to the Eukaryotes group, which has two main categories, Lorasia Theory and the supraprimates. Humans are...
Sorry, I had to pee quick. But I had a question. So, all right. So see where it's 60 million years ago, these show up, but 100 million years ago, the super primates go away and the placentals go into their own branch. Well, what was this? Like, what happened to the animals in between that time that eventually evolved into these? Does that make sense?
Are super primates. So let's look at Lorasia Theory first. Lots of well-known animal species belong to Lorasia Theory, including all of those that are carnivores. The carnivore order includes bears, dogs, and cats, but also sea creatures such as seals and walruses. Lorasia Theory also includes the ungulates, which are the animals with hooves. Those with an odd number of toes are called perissodactyls and include horses and rhinos. Those with an even number of toes are called artiodactyls and include farm animals like pigs, cows, and sheep, but
Hippos
also
and
animals
pigs,
with
that makes
antlers
sense.
like deer. Interestingly, dolphins and whales are also closely related to the artiodactyls. They evolved from land animals that eventually returned to the sea. Okay, let's look at these
Don't
super
mess with
primates.
moosers, they're
From the
huge.
original super primates evolved rabbits and rodents, but also the earliest types of actual primates. We tend to associate primates with monkeys, but the primate order also includes animals such as tarsiers and lemurs. Monkeys, as well as apes, belong to a special group of primates called simians. Now, a lot of people use the word monkey and ape interchangeably, but really they are quite different. Apes do
I
not
learned
have
that in the wild
tails
thornberries,
and are
alright?
generally quite a bit larger and smarter. It is, of course, from the early ape species that humans evolved. Currently, there are only 4 kinds of great apes: orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans. But over the last 15 million years, there have been many other kinds as well. It's important to remember that the great apes of today all evolved from these now extinct species, not from each other. So although
We're
you
much
may
more
sometimes
related.
hear it said that humans evolved from
Oh
chimpanzees,
my god. Pet peeve of mine. Who installed that into the minds of people? So we're more like siblings. So we're more with bonobos and chimpanzees, or like. So there was something that lived this time ago, what, 7 million years, that then kind of took 2 branches to develop into these guys, or 3.
This is actually not true. Both modern humans and modern chimps evolved from a now extinct common ancestor who lived about 7 million years ago. To us, that creature probably looked more like a chimpanzee than a human, but really they were equally both. From that common ancestor evolved
To a
the now
chimpanzee, would
extinct
they look more like a
genus
human?
known as Australopithecus, which included the female known as Lucy, whose skeleton was found in Africa in the 1970s and dated to about 3 million years ago. Australopithecus is thought to be one of the earliest apes to walk primarily on 2 feet. From Australopithecus evolved the genus Homo, which is the genus that modern humans, called Homo sapiens, belong to. Currently, Homo sapiens is the only species in this genus, but over the last 2.5 million years, many other Homo species have come and gone. We know this from the archaeological record, which gets larger and better every year. One of the earliest Homo species was Homo habilis.
Guys, so bonobos and chimpanzees are more related to humans, to us, than they are to gorillas?
They were among the first humans to start extensively using tools. Then there was Homo erectus, the African version of which is now called Homo ergaster.
I'm a child.
They are thought to be the direct ancestor of Homo heidelbergensis, from which came Homo sapiens, our close cousins the Neanderthals, and a recently discovered group known as the Denisovans.
I'm disappointed in myself for smiling
at
at
back
that.
around 50,000 years in history to find more than one human species still existing on our planet. At that time, the Neanderthals and the Denisovans were still around, as was Homo floresiensis,
must have been
the
creepy.
hobbit-like species that lived on an island in what is today Indonesia.
Bilbo.
But of course, nowadays, Homo sapiens is the only human species left. I've chosen a member of the South African San tribe to represent our species, since genetically they are closer to the ancestor of all living humans than any other group on Earth. So there you have.
We're much more like connected now, and so, you know, since the world is more connected, it seems less likely that there's going to be 2 branches of humans. But I wonder how long it would take, or it's not a matter of time, I guess it's environment, it would take to like separate into 2 species again.
Have it. A step-by-step look at how modern humans evolved all the way from single-celled
I paused
organisms.
so much, but
of course, there's a lot more that could be said on the topic. And in this video, I wasn't able to go into all the various lines of evidence that support the theory of evolution. However, fellow YouTuber Stefan Milo has made a video that starts to scratch the surface of that subtopic.
Really cool video. I love learning more about this stuff, and every time I learn more, I just end up having more questions, and I like that. It's fun, stimulating, fascinating, and yeah, I know you guys are great at answering my questions. I'll check down in the comments. See you next time.